So, hi all. I hope you're all enjoying Magento 2 right now. It's been released, right? So, today I'm going to talk a little bit about challenges in architecting your custom Magento 2 solutions. There was quite a lot of topic today about actually migrating your Magento 1 code to Magento 2. In my talk, I'm going to give a little bit of summary of all of this stuff. So, a little bit about me. I'm one of former Magento 1 core developers, so I've been a guy who was doing all this terrible stuff in Magento 1 that you have to deal with right now when you're going to migrate to Magento 2. I love to take challenges, so this is kind of one of my challenges to give some good advice for you guys. I love to optimize performance. It's another topic I usually cover, but not in this particular talk. Also, I give trainings and I also do some consultancy to advise companies how to do Magento customizations in the right way. So, are there any software architects in this room? Are there any senior developers? Okay, medium? Juniors? Okay, so I just want to level you up, all of you. Actually, you are all software architects. Because software itself is already an architecture that you are creating. So like, you are architecting your solutions. You are not just developers, you are not code monkey, right? You are thinking about the way how entities relate to each other, you are thinking about the business logic and so on. So your architecture is already your code. So we are also responsible for the design of our software. And this is why being a software architect, so being a developer in general, is a very responsible task. And architecting the software is very hard. Like, it's so hard that when in 2007 I've been a part of Magento Core, there was no Zen Framework 1 in release candidate even. It was like beta version. We were having an upstream to SVN repository of Zen Framework in order to develop our stuff. And as soon as we did SVN app in the beginning of the day, in the morning, like, we had 50% chance that our code breaks. So it was a little bit of fun experience. Also, Symfony 1 just got released before we did Magento 1 beta version. And Symfony 1, did anyone work with Symfony 1? Do you like it? Okay, so we can agree that Symfony 1 was not that good framework at the time. It was also the thing. How do you think, were there any composer in 2007, right? There were no composer, because composer got finally released in 2012, right? So this is quite a new thing, and you know, like, managing all the kind of stuff was quite hard. Unit testing as well was not yet a thing in PHP community. Like, there was some first versions of PHP unit being released in 2001, but still it was not that widespread like now. So everyone also was using Subversion instead of Git. And you know, like, the term merge hell comes from SVN. And when we were doing, you know, branching in SVN in Magento Core, we were also a little bit hesitant to create branches, because for us it was easier to work with one big trunk and trying to modify the code, and yeah, it was a mess. I wish I knew everything I know now over that time, and I could really affect, you know, the process from the beginning, but unfortunately it didn't happen like this, you know, like, and you gain experience by doing mistakes, and doing mistakes is quite a good thing. So if I would knew everything now back at that time, I wouldn't have this talk today, and I wouldn't be able to share with you some of stuff that I find challenging in Magento 2 compared to Magento 1. So let's start with the challenge. Let's start first with thing mentioning that Magento 2 itself, it's a refactoring of Magento 1. So at the moment, what you see in Magento 2 in most of the places you know, like there's a lot of code being transferred to Magento 2 from Magento 1, and it means I'm responsible for part of this code, and I'm feeling really shy. So the challenge number 0. We are all developers over here, so I can start proper numbering, right? So using Magento 1.x approach when you develop Magento 2 modules. So this is the first challenge. And I must say, again, that Magento 2 is a huge step ahead. And learning new concepts is a very hard thing, and you cannot really apply Magento 1 practices to Magento 2. So it's like a complete new system. Also, I'm really happy that Magento 2 didn't choose Symfony or Doctrine, because the learning curve then would be much more higher. Because, you know, like we have very huge community out here, right? We have so many developers used to Magento 1, and if we would use Doctrine, if we would use Symfony controllers and all of this stuff, yeah, we wouldn't be happy at all. And also, did any one of you work with Symfony 2? Did any one of you like the configuration verbosity of Symfony 2? No hands. Okay, so this is a good sign that Magento had not chosen Symfony 2 as a base for the framework. So now, challenge number 1. Looking at the core modules in order to implement your own functionality. Like in Magento 1, when we were trying to create something, we were looking at things how it was done in core, we were trying to reproduce it in our modules, and yeah, it was a little bit of good approach to follow things from the core, but not in Magento 2. Again, because there's a lot of code that just got migrated from Magento 1 into Magento 2 without too much of modifications. So, do not look into module, for example, of implementation. What you should do, let's say if you take a look at the Magento customer module, you would find something like this, right? You will find that there are so many dependencies. There was even better slides before when you had more dependencies, but Magento customer module is treated as an example of proper implementation, but still there are some places you can take a look at it, but you would not have the proper design of your module in that. What you should do instead, yeah, this is dependency hell. What you should do, instead, you should avoid looking into Magento core modules, but you should learn something from DevDocs. Magento 2 comes with very nice documentation and with very nice explanation of service contracts that are used in Magento 2. It has nice explanation how to work with entities. It has nice explanation of the module structures and so on. So you shouldn't look into Magento code in order to start developing. Just start from documentation. It's much more better. Challenge number 2, data model dependencies. And this I find from time to time on all of the customer projects I take part in. So, what is very interesting, like we have global website store model in Magento. Like it still exists in Magento 2 as well, but it also adds limitations to your implementation because you're depending on this GVS model, and when you bind your data to GVS, it means you're having scaling issues afterwards about which you wouldn't think in advance. Let's take a look at a simple example. So we are all in Europe, right? So our customers usually can sell to 28 countries within European Union, right? So it means countries also might have different languages, like Belgium has French and Dutch. Switzerland has 3 languages, right? And there are so many European countries that have multiple languages, and it might combine to the number of member states multiplied by number of languages. Maybe also a customer wants to have also English as a default language for all of the countries, in case there is some European person who don't know the local language, so they want to order in English, right? Every country might get its own domain name. Do you know where I'm leading to? Okay. Price might differ for each country as well, depending on the VAT settings and maybe on the way how your customer wants to present the selling of the product in a particular country. Maybe in Switzerland they would like to set up a higher price. However, in Spain they would try to reduce the price in order to drive more sales, right? So the problem here comes from you might end up with 100 store views because you might have multiple languages per website, per each country, right? Your language and country combination results also in data duplications in the AV structure. So imagine your customer specifying a name of product in German for Switzerland, for Germany, for I don't remember, maybe Luxembourg as well, and you know, like all those countries where you need German language or French or any other one. So you have like data duplications already. So avoid using existing structures in your initial design of the feature, because you can inverse your dependencies. And inversing dependencies, it means you can create own scope of the data, like locale scope or something like this, to place and specify your data. So you have English language, you have German language, French language, and then you can assign this scope to the website, to the store view or a store group. So you are having completely separated data structures in your modules from the standard GVS structure. And in this case, you can scale better, because when your customer needs to implement something, he just needs to add a new scope, and then he just needs to select the scope in one of the countries or websites you are going to create in Magento. The challenge number 3, extending existing functionality. So we were talking a lot about rewrites today, about plugins and so on. So I can say definitely rewrite is a bad thing. You shouldn't replace existing functionality with your functionality by extending existing functionality. So, and it's not because of conflicts. It's actually because you are adding some additional functionality to a class that already exists, and you don't know what might change in your class from which you are extending from. There might be missing protected methods that you are using in the future releases. There might be any kind of thing happening that does not depend on your module. It depends on stuff outside of your module. Also, you know, like plugin is a nice thing, but it's also a bad thing. Why plugins are a bad thing? Because if you have extending, you are extending from some class, you already modified behavior. Plugin does the same thing. Behind the scenes, Magento extends a class and it overrides the public method on this class by adding your plugin functionality inside of it. If you are just changing the name representation of a product or a customer or anything like this, you shouldn't create a plugin for that, especially if you are using your code yourself. Plugins are only good thing if you do it for interfaces and only when you need to replace the method called system-wide. Dependency injection is a good thing. So let's say you have some small class in Magento core that does something, you want to extend the functionality of this class. So what you can use dependency injection. You can create your own class that will implement the same interface as the original one, and you will pass original class's dependency. And then you will use the public interface of that class instead of actually rewriting the class itself or adding plugins to it. And then you can replace this class in particular places where this class is used. So let's say instead of using preference, because preference is also a bad way to customize your stuff, you can define the default implementation of interface through preference, but writing class through preference is a bad thing. But if you, let's say, specify for a particular class that uses a product model as dependency, you specify your own class implementation, and then your own class implementation will use the standard interface for product. You don't have a hell in the future when something changes in the product class. You just use already defined public API for product. So if this stuff breaks, it means there's a major version bump in Magento core, and you are safe from unexpected changes in minor versions. So here we come to the conclusion that substitution is a good thing. However, there's a big challenge at the moment because there's a lot of Magento 1 code that is not yet small enough to implement this kind of substitutions. So I would advise, if you do something, try to abstract yourself away from the core implementation at the moment. And this is going to be on the next slide. So substitution is a good thing, but only for interfaces. You shouldn't depend on concrete implementations, because interfaces, as mentioned by Magento, they're not going to change between major versions. So when there is a new major version of the module being released, then the interface might get changed. But in all the minor versions, you are safe to rely on this interface. So the challenge number 4 is actually depending on the concrete implementation, as I said earlier. And this is very interesting one, because you might actually inject some concrete class from Magento catalog, but you don't know if this class is going to exist in the next version, because concrete classes implementation are not part of semantic version and policy for Magento 2. So let's say if Magento 2 is using somewhere product model in one version, in another version it might not have this product model at all. So, but Magento 2 itself already have a product data interface that still gets preserved between versions. So injecting a concrete class from another component actually leads to fragile dependency. It means you cannot be sure that this dependency will still exist in the future versions. So what you should do to protect yourself from this kind of stuff to happen, because sometimes there is no interface for some classes in Magento core, but you still have to use them. So in this case, you should protect your code by introducing own abstractions. So you can create your own interface based on Magento core class, and you can implement this interface yourself by passing this class's dependency. But when, for instance, something changes in Magento core, you have to only change this small abstraction instead of changing all your class where you was using this dependency. So let's say you have a product model that you are using all the time, like there's getName method, getSKU method, or something like this, and then something gets changed, like getName gets removed and moved to another class. However, there is an interface that still provides this data, but you are depending on this product class concrete implementation. And then if you have an abstraction layer for retrieving the product name, you just change this abstraction layer. You will have just a separate class called product name retrieval or something like this that will implement concrete interface. And if it changes, you just change the lines of code in this class instead of changing it across all your module. So this is about introducing own abstractions. So how to do it? First of all, you need to find the functionality you want to use from Magento 2 module. Then you create your own interface, right? Then you create an adapter based on that interface that will use Magento 2 module class as a dependency. And question, is it over-engineering? Any hands? No. No, it's not over-engineering. And here's why. Your abstraction, you are abstracting your business logic from your code, from concrete implementation of the framework. So it means your business logic you are creating from Magento 2 module can be later on reused in Magento 1 modules. So you can just create special adapters for Magento 1 to retrieve data from a database or from something else, but your main business logic is still going to be unchanged. You're just replacing adapters. And later on you can add some additional systems, like you'd like to implement something in Shopify, whatever. I don't know if you would do it in PHP, but anyway, you can abstract yourself away from a framework and you can test your code more easily as well. Like Vinay was mentioning today in his talk about writing testable code. So this is like the next step you would do. You would abstract yourself from a framework in order to make your business logic fully automated, tested, making sure that it works nice, that it works smoothly, and then you only have some small tests for particular adapter for Magento framework, for Magento 2 or for Magento 1. So you can reuse your logic in Magento 1 as well. So now there comes a big question, the ultimate challenge, right? Porting Magento 1 code to Magento 2 without having two separate code bases. And I don't think it's really a challenge, because it's a great opportunity. It's really a great opportunity to decouple your business logic, move it in a separate component, really make your code more cleaner, more testable, cover it with unit tests, right? You have a lot of legacy code that is uncovered with unit tests, that runs in production, and at some point of time it might fail. So this is a great opportunity to create a Magento 2 module that will realize your logic decoupled from the framework, and then use the same decoupled logic within Magento 1 for your existing module. Just replace the implementation through adapters. So, first of all, how to start this kind of a process? You might want to drive your design by BDD. And BDD is very interesting approach when you don't draw, like full-featured diagrams how each actors depend on each other. You try to use your code as a customer of the code. So you are using the code you are going to write before you are going to write the code. And in this case, you create your code much more simpler, because if you make it very complex, then in this case, you would feel it's untestable. So you try to extract some stuff that is complex and move it to a separate component that is more simple. Another thing, start from high-level abstractions. So you would never find out, do you need a driver pool for retrieving some entities, or you need to have an entity repository with this entity type. You will never find it on initial stages of the project. It's okay to write stuff and then change your design of the code. As soon as you have it covered with automated tests, you are free to refactor and extract stuff and pull stuff away. So you can start from high-level abstractions, like you want to change product model, or you want to introduce some new pricing logic. You can create some price repository stuff from which you are going to retrieve the data from Magento. Then you would try to go on this high-level abstraction. You try to use Magento repositories, and you will find out, okay, I can extract Magento repository as a separate thing, and I can use my own repositories that I can reuse also in Magento 1. And then you go from high-level things to a small level details. So you will have a small adapter for Magento 1, Magento 2, or any other frameworks. Also, you will introduce new code by referencing requirements from existing one. So do not try to cover existing module in Magento 1 and just transfer it to Magento 2 with unit tests. In most of the cases, you will fail to write tests, like was mentioned today by Vinay. So try to use your code as a reference of the current business logic implementation. Do not try just to copy-paste your code and think it will be a proper way to design your new application. Just try to find out what part of this code is representing which actor in your business logic. So another thing is abstracting your business logic from the platform. So the last thing is actually creating adapters for framework-specific code. I already covered this one. And tomorrow we have workshop where we're going to do it for one of Magento 1 community modules. I was writing on Twitter and asking for submitting some modules for this workshop. So we are going to take the challenge together. We're going to take Magento 1 modules that was submitted as an idea for this workshop. Actually, it will be a module from Vinay about customer group restrictions for catalog. We will learn something about solid principles, not through presentation or explaining each principle in theory. We are going to try it out in practice. And the workshop is going to start at 2 p.m. with a small break between 4 and 4:30. And at 4:30 we're going to finalize the workshop. We are not going to create a full functional module. We're just going to try to extract the business logic from existing Magento 1 module and try to make it independent of the framework. So, first of all, thank you for listening. And if you have some questions, you can ask them now, or later on you can ping me on Twitter. Any questions?
I have one question. I don't know if I understood your thing about substitution is good. It means substituting existing core classes in Magento that are implemented from interface with our own implementation.
Okay, so the substitution thing, it's not a rewrite. I would say you're substituting a class usage in particular place through the XML, but you are not overriding the preference for the interface. So it's kind of injecting your new code into existing classes that Magento using. Yes, Vinay?
There's one point where that I don't have a good answer for. So, for example, if I've got an interface and I want to configure the arguments for the constructor. So I have a configuration type, command list, for example, command list interface, arguments, commands, and then it's an array of commands classes. So the interface hasn't got a constructor, but the configuration is coupling to is for a constructor of an implementation. So there, this nice concept kind of falls apart a bit. Right? It's not possible to configure the DI for an interface, but it's still kind of configured for the interface.
So in this case, I would abstract away, this kind of array you passing as an argument into your object, right? I would abstract it into pool interface, where you have particular contract of the pool where you can retrieve implementation based on some logic internally. So you can retrieve some of the items. So like you are moving away from using directly arrays, so you have another small class that is responsible for manipulating those dependencies you are passing in.
It already is a pool, and that in turn needs the dependencies. So at one point it's
yes,
but move either to PHP only or I don't know. At one point.
Yeah, but then this pool will implement an interface that you're passing into your concrete implementation, right? And this interface you can later on replace with another pool that implements it in a different way. So let's say if later on you would like to retrieve the data from configuration file instead of using DI, you can create a configuration retrieval pool, and then this one will read some configuration files from outside. Or if you'd like to pass it directly in DI XML, you can do it with array pool implementation or something like this.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I get your idea. It's just for me, it's still like. That problem is inherent to the way the system works.
Yes, it's like finding a compromise. You cannot, make your design perfect. You cannot reduce it to 2 or 3 dependencies. Sometimes you need to implement something like plugins, right? Where you have to define this pool of plugins, pass into your code. So it's very hard. Yes?
Okay, I have a question because you mentioned to actually not looking through the code for examples, but to use Magento docs, which I think is a great idea, but Magento docs are not covering everything. And
yes.
They can't cover everything because it's not possible. And so my question is, for example, you have a task where you need to, I don't know, let's say programmatically create config and simple products and associate them together, yeah? And first of all, it's not mentioned in the documentation, but also if you search through Magento, there are like at least 3 or 4 different ways how Magento is doing it. So what's the best approach?
There is no best approach in this case because there is no definite explanation in documentation itself. And it's actually not a problem of Magento even itself, you cannot describe a solution for every problem in documentation. So there still will be some room for new content being added. So in this case, I would do some research myself for this problem. Maybe I would reach out Stack Overflow or better Magento forums where there are some questions about functionality, and then submit a pull request to docs section with your concrete solution that you came up with.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, so I will not keep you away from the next talk that is happening in business room, and then there are some drinks, so I think you are hesitant to go on and party tonight. So, thank you very much.